They've also estimated that the audience for this will be about 1 million people for the initial broadcast and streaming online, and probably substantially more following that. They're distributing it in other ways for international broadcast. It'll be on other streaming platforms. It'll be available for educational use, and for communities, people to see it and show it, and also for some film festivals. One of the things that's particularly opportune about this film is that it comes next year during the 50th anniversary of the Paris Peace Accords and the withdrawal of the last US combat troops, an opportune moment to share with people that, to remind Americans that it was a protest movement that helped to limit and end the war in Vietnam. We've been able to get this far in production thanks to the support of over 250 million people who've contributed varying amounts. PBS is also coming in right now with a substantial sum to help us with our finishing costs, but we still need to raise a substantial amount also to help complete the film and deliver it to PBS in time for the national broadcast. So we're hoping that all of you who are online today will consider making a donation to support the film and enable us to deliver it to PBS in time for this premiere broadcast next spring. I'm going to put in the chat right now a link that you can use to donate and also to sign up for our email list. The website is movementandthemadman.com. You'll see that in the chat. And hopefully, you can contribute and help us get to the finish line. Be part of the movement to help the movement of the Madman get done and seen by eventually, hopefully, millions of people, and inspire millions, particularly people who are active today, activists, young activists of any age. We'd also welcome you, of course, sharing the website. And on the website, there's an 11-minute shorter preview of the film, too, which you can share with others. So we thank you for this opportunity, and we welcome your support, whatever you can give for the film.
Thanks, Steve. Did I understand you to say that 250 million people have already donated?
No, 250 people have contributed.
People, okay, okay. I thought that would be quite a fundraising operation.
Yes, wouldn't that be something?
Million,
right?
Yeah.
That would be.
Could you talk a little bit more about the level of financial need? What is it going to take to put this over the top, and and what more concretely what people here can do besides giving a donation themselves?
Well, they can, as I said, they can share this with others, and hopefully interest others to support the film. And as I said, any amount will help. Some people hopefully may be able to give larger amounts, some smaller. We've had a wide variety of donations to the film so far, which have made it possible to get this far. One of the major expenses that we still need to cover is the extensive archival footage and photos that we have to license for the film. And those costs are quite expensive. We also need to license the music and actually have a score done, music score done for the film too, and those are expensive. So we're looking at several $100,000 that we still need to raise. And that's hopefully by the end of the year, because we need to deliver this cut early next year to PBS so that it will be ready for broadcast. So hopefully that gives you some, at least general idea of what we need.
Thanks. So dig deep, everybody, and pitch in. So let's see if there's any questions or comments from the attendees, whether it's about the substance of the film or any suggestions or questions about how the project is done. You could raise your virtual hand using Zoom. If you go to the bottom of your Zoom window where it says reactions, there's something that says raise hand. And if you click that, we will see your hand raised and we'll call on you. Or if you can't, if you don't want to do it that way, you could just type your question into the chat or your comment. I just as rather hear your voice. Robert Schaefer, go ahead. I guess I have to make you unmute. Okay.
I was very impressed with what I saw. I appreciate all of your efforts, and I certainly know how the expenses that you're still undertaking. My question is whether the film that, or the excerpt that we saw, assumes opposition to the war as reasonable and rational, and whether an audience in 2023 will just come in with that assumption. So my question is whether other parts of the larger film make the case for why this war was so wrong, immoral, illegal, unjust, all that sort of thing. And it's one thing to, of course, it's important to say we made a difference in what we did, but it's also, it seems to me, important to explain to a newer generation why the war was so horrific.
If I could respond.
Go for it, Robert. Yeah.
We do have a variety of voices. I mean, it's, as we said, this is basically a third of the full film. And we do throughout the film have a number of voices talk about the immorality, the illegality, stupidity of the war. But I think there's one segment that I think, is really interesting, is about Hamburger Hill, which was a
terrible battle, right? Yeah.
Remember that, but that was where a bunch of US soldiers were told to take this hill. And it was just, it was a hill near Laos, and they made it up to the top, but many of them were killed and injured and so on. And of course they get to the top and, and then they abandoned it immediately. I mean, it was sort of pointless, which was a good example of how pointless the whole war was. And we have a very interesting interview with one of the soldiers who participated in it and talked about, so from his perspective, how it was. So I think we do cover that base pretty well. I mean, it was, you're right. I mean, it is important to explain to people, just how crazy it was. Not that it wasn't, not that we don't have plenty of examples since the Iraq, Afghanistan, so on. But anyway, that's.
Great, thanks. Let's go to Ruth Strauss. Ruth, you haven't got your video on. We can hear you though.
It was just fantastic, and kudos to you all for getting PBS to do it. They're not exactly radical. Brings back a lot of memories. I've seen a lot of protests in Boston, and I wonder if I'm in that group. But the thing I did want to say, and I say this to my family all the time, you didn't ask for my opinion.
Ruth, we can't hear you very well. You're breaking up. Can you speak any better? Can you get your?
I'll change and re-raise.
That's better. That's better already.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, if we can.
Okay. So anyway, as I said, I always say to my family, you didn't ask for my opinion, but that never stopped me from giving it. If you're strapped for cash, I would drop the idea of the soundtrack or the whatever, the music or whatever you were talking about, because the film stands so well on its own, you don't miss anything like that. So I just wanted to offer that. It's fantastic.
Okay, thanks. Anybody want to comment? I can go to the next person if not, but let's go to Trudy Knowles. Trudy, can you unmute?
Oh, there. Okay. I want to say I still have my moratorium buttons.
Great.
This one is from the December moratorium, but I also have the October, November moratorium. I was in Chicago at the time, and after the Democratic National Convention that was so violent, that November moratorium in Chicago was extremely violent. There was a lot of police brutality and people being, I remember a friend being dragged across the plaza by his hair. And we all went back the following week because it was so violent. And that was when, as you recall, Mayor Daley was saying, shoot to kill the protesters, etc. So I'm wondering, is Chicago at all in this this movie?
The quick answer is no. The anti-war movement went on for at least a decade. And we decided that we were not going to give a history lesson. We were going to tell a story. And this is the story we decided to tell with enough background, like Robert Schaefer asked, enough background that people understood why we were doing what we were doing. But we are trying to just tell this story, tell it as well as we can.
All right, thanks.
Okay, great. Let's go to Bob Griss.
I really like the first question that's raised. The response seemed to be there are so many wars since this Vietnam War that you really couldn't tell the history of all of them in a meaningful way. And my feeling is that there should be a part of the film that addresses war as an inappropriate way of responding to political conflict. And the fact that that's recognized by a cross-section of the population, including military people, I think is what's significant about the mobilization and what you are focusing on here. It's not just the atrocities that Nixon would have gladly have done, but the fact that we are increasingly a militaristic society now. And that's why this story is so invaluable. And I'm not sure focusing on the history of one particular war is going to convey that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Anybody like to take up on that?
Stephen Talbot, do you want to say something or?
Yes, I totally respect your position and I happen to agree with it, which makes it easier that war is not the answer. But as a filmmaker and as a journalist, I disagree with you actually that you can't, the film you're talking about would be an interesting film to make. But what we decided to do was to tell a very particular story, as Robert said, not the whole history of the anti-war movement by any stretch, but to tell a very particular story. And I think this is really important for us to tell it from multiple perspectives, because we were fortunate enough to be able to talk to people, Morton Halperin, Tony Lake, Roger Morris, who actually worked for Nixon and Kissinger at the time, developing this plan, which they then turned against. And they all resigned, over the Cambodia invasion the following spring. Halperin had left earlier, but he went public then, and Lake and Morris quit, appalled by that invasion. And we also interviewed Stephen Bull, who is Nixon's personal aide, very close to him and still a totally pro-Nixon person. So in addition to all the anti-war people we interviewed, and we did a total of over 30 in-depth interviews for this film, we really wanted to get different perspectives, and also in the clips and the archive footage, you'll hear different voices, because it was a showdown and the country was very, very divided. and the country was beginning to turn against the war, the majority of the country, but it wasn't there yet. And Nixon was very successful in manipulating public opinion too. So all those aspects we try to bring out, and the only way we could do it in a manageable 90 minutes was to tell this very one particular, very dramatic story, which we think stands for a lot, but it's a very particular story.
Okay, great. Let's go to Brian Drolet.
So I just wanted to mention that Dave Zeiger did a very interesting film also called Sir No Sir on GI resistance within the war. And I think that's an important complementary film to this one. I want to congratulate the filmmakers because I do think that this point about an action you take, whether it's going to a demonstration or whatever, has effects that you don't actually realize at the time. And I think that message coming through this film is extremely important. And I want to give one example from my own experience is that I was filming Winter Soldier 2 back in, I think it was 2005 or 6 in Washington, D.C., where about 300 active duty and veteran GIs came together to express their opposition to the war in Iraq. And riding down there with a couple of the Iraq veterans against the war, I mentioned that during the Vietnam War, we had published a pamphlet called GI Revolts. And it was a chapter taken from a book by, I think, Richard Boyle. And he said to me, this young kid sitting next to me, a Iraq veteran, he said to me, "Was that a white pamphlet with a color picture on it?" And I said, "Yeah, it was." And he said, "Oh," he said, "you know, my high school teacher knew I was against the war, and he sent me that pamphlet in Iraq." And I read it, and I had it laying on my bunk, and the other members of my crew read it. And my sergeant came in and he read it, and we decided to mutiny because they had been sending us out without adequate armor on our equipment, on our trucks and stuff. And so we went out and we basically pulled the motors apart on our vehicles so that they couldn't operate. And I thought, damn, 40 years ago we did that pamphlet, and you know, here we are, 2005. And it's having an impact, or had an impact, in Iraq. So I think the message of this film is extremely important, and it's one that people need to grasp today. And in my conversations with, there's a lot of graybeards I see on this discussion. And I hear a lot, well, you know, that we're too old to go do something, you know what I mean? And I always remember that quote, "Let the youth take the lead, but not let the old folks not be too far behind," you know? And there's much more to say, but I'll just end with one point, is that the United States has the largest, most powerful, most expensive military in the history of the world. And it has not won a war since probably the First World War, if you consider that the Russians really won the Second World War. We've lost in Vietnam, we've lost in Iraq, we've lost in Afghanistan. Oh, we did win in Panama and Grenada. And so I think
let me just suggest you
that's something to ponder, you know, so amen.
Thank you very much. That's a great story, Brian. Anybody like to respond to that?
I think that's, I don't think that was a question. I thought that was a very, very great comment that he made. So
I agree. I think Brian's point speaks for itself. Thank you. Let's go to Barbara Harrison.
Hi, I'm just curious to know how you are going to end the film, the epilogue, and if you will draw what took place in Vietnam with a message about what is happening today, so that there's a connection. We in this country are exceptional. We do not connect to history. We seem to be very stupid that way. We don't learn anything from history. And of course, a lot of it doesn't get into the textbooks in the public schools because of the Christian right censoring the books down in Texas. So how can you draw the lessons to today? So maybe, just maybe, somewhere along the line, maybe we'll learn something.
Steve?
I would say the film doesn't go on because, again, we've got 90 minutes, and it certainly will end with the message that you heard already in this excerpt, that how important it is for people to take action, and even when you don't feel that you're accomplishing anything at the moment, because lo and behold, it turns out often you could have a tremendous impact. Look, this film, beyond the big break we have in this film is that, as Steve Ladd mentioned before, and Robert, this is going to be on PBS. And so it's going to have a big initial audience. That's a big break. I mean, a lot of anti-war films, a lot of independent films, period, don't get that kind of exposure. So this raises this film to a whole other level. But that's just one aspect. I mean, this film is going to be shown in festivals. It's going to have a big learning component. There's going to be a website for it. There is already. There's international distribution that will be done. It'll be shown in other countries. This is going to be streaming, in perpetuity on PBS's website. This is going to be shown in community groups, in schools and colleges. It'll be available in libraries. We want to get this out. We're very dedicated to getting this out as widely as possible. And to get to your point, to start discussions, to have people talking about, what happened, this story is a story that most Americans do not know, and to start a discussion about all the things all of you, I know, are so properly concerned about.
I will just make one more point, that all the places you have mentioned, how are you going to get to rural communities? I have worked on single payer healthcare, and that movement is negligent in not wanting to go into the rural communities, and that's by making storytelling. So a lot of what you're talking about is not accessible to those people. And if we're going to change how this country, the divisions, and who now with the volunteer army ends up going to war, or a facsimile, just even going in the military, we've got to be reaching across the ethnic, class, and cultural boundaries if we are to make change. So that's one place I think we fall very short in living in our own little cubicles, so to speak. So I hope you will consider finding a way of making relationships with people in rural areas so that they can be included, because they have been excluded by the Democrats and, of course, the Republicans who use them emotionally to be part of the decision process. And they, in some ways, have given up.
So thanks, Barbara. Yeah, a lot of the passionate anti-war activists with the questions tonight are pressing the filmmakers to make the lessons more explicit, drive it home. So what do we have to do now to, the filmmakers are trying to hold the line and say, no, we have to tell a compelling story. So would one of you want to respond to her?
I will just reiterate what Steve and Robert have already said, and Steve Ladd, that the film does end with what I feel is a very resonant reminder that what you do makes a difference. So the last 2 minutes of the film are who I consider to be some of the heroes of the film, reminding the young people and the middle-aged people of today that what you do matters. And so for me, that's timeless. That's timeless. And you don't need to see, over the course of this film, Black Lives Matters exploded when we were in the process of just beginning to make this film happen. And there was a question at one point, should we make that very, explicit parallel to this? Like, lift your voice, make a difference. And ultimately, the decision that we made is that it's much more broad than that. And this needs to, we shouldn't date ourselves, that this message is timeless and will resonate through conflicts today and into the future.
Thanks, Stephanie. So it's getting a little bit late. I don't want to wear out our welcome. We got 3 more people with questions. I'm going to ask them each to ask their question in turn, and then ask the filmmakers to make final responses of a wrap-up character as well as responding. So, Amar, will you speak your question?
Yeah, I was wondering if U.S. presidents since Richard Nixon, if they've used this Madman theory.
And so let me go to Jean Stevens next with hers. Jean?
Excuse me, I wanted to find out if you might be able to get music from famous musicians from the 60s in your film. And hopefully, Stephanie, you can get your daughter and give her some ideas on how we can get the youth to really get on board here. I love your film.
And let's hear from Mark Rust.
So my question is, have you considered, or if not, please do consider creating a platform, a community platform around it, and also integrating with people like Buckminster Fuller Institute and many others to show where does this fit into the larger picture. So rather than trying to force it into the film, use the film as a jewel that really explains what you've got, but also can you work hard after you got the film released, you're going to work hard to incorporate it into the rest of the movements.
Thanks, Mark. And Robert, you please forgive me, I'm going to skip you because you had a turn already, just in the interest of time. So let me ask now the filmmakers to respond to either the questions or make a final statement. Let's just go around. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go first on the first question about whether that Madman theory has been used. Actually, Daniel Ellsberg has done an extremely good job of cataloging all the times that US presidents, or how the nuclear threat has been used consistently ever since World War II. And his most recent book, I know the subtitle is something like Confessions of a Nuclear Strategist or something. Anyway, he explains that, and I think that's what I suggest that you look at, some of which were the Madman variation. Anyway, I mean, starting with Eisenhower and Korea. But anyway, that's an answer to that. I don't know whether
Right. Stephen wanted to take a final crack.
Yeah, yes, that Ellsberg book is Doomsday, isn't it?
Doomsday, that's it.
Yeah, but it's came out a few years ago, and it's, if you want to know about nuclear threats and how they've been used by the United States often since World War II, too often, that's a really good source. He tells one story which will probably end up being something of a sidebar on our website, something I want to get out. He says that the North Vietnamese told people privately that they had been threatened 13 times in the course of the war with nuclear weapons. And as those of you, I know a lot of you know a lot about the Vietnam War and have studied it, that the United States offered nuclear weapons to the French in 1954 to use in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. So there are a couple of big times. Westmoreland wanted to use nuclear weapons at one point in the war, and actually Lyndon Johnson stepped in and said, no, we can't do that. So the nuclear threat, which of course is very much, unfortunately, part of our lives now, is a really, really strong part of our story.
Excellent. Stephanie, you want to take a turn?
I think that, thanks. And I think that, thank you all for giving us the opportunity to share this with you this evening. And to anyone wondering about the relevance to a young audience, young being like my daughter, who's a senior in high school now, I edit it at home, and her room is right next to mine. And so during COVID, we were sheltering in place together and working on this film. So she has been listening to us make this film for the last, year plus. And they are heroes as much to her as they are to me. And the messages that she hears are as resonant to her as they were to those of you who were in the streets with this 50 years ago. Another thing that she has said is, how come you guys had all the good music?
We really did.
That was
There's
great.
no doubt about
I could only agree.
Steve, for a final word?
Sure. There was a question earlier about reaching rural communities or reaching more broadly. And I just want to emphasize that the PBS broadcast of this means that just about everybody in America can see this film, that there's 330 stations that will air it. It'll be available on the PBS website, and it'll be, as was mentioned, available internationally too. So, we need help from groups like yours and people in part of your group to help reach that wider audience, to make sure that more people watch this film too. So we'll be doing a big PR campaign as well to make sure this film gets broadly viewed and inspires people, whatever their activism is, whatever their cause is, and hopefully it will have a significant impact and will reach many millions of people. But we do need your support, funding support, to come back to that, to help us finish the film. So I see that some people have given so far, but I'm going to put the link in again for those that feel so inspired to make a donation or to sign up on our website just to be on our email list as well and just stay informed about the film and what you can do to help promote it. So thank you.
So I'd like to thank the Movement and the Madman team of Robert, Stephen, Stephanie, and Steve for a really inspiring cut and a great conversation. Thank you for everyone who attended. We appreciate it. I will send a follow-up email tomorrow with a video of the discussion portions that we can't release a video of the film yet, but the portions where we talked about it, we're going to share, and please share those with your friends. And I'll again remind you in that email to donate if you haven't already. Thank